Now, the theme for this year's Mental Health Awareness Week recently was anxiety, and a new report from the Mental Health Foundation has found that 1 in 5 people, that's about 20%, feel anxious all or most of the time. The report is based on an online survey conducted by Opinium of 6,000 adults to look at anxiety in the UK population. It found that nearly 3/4 of the population had felt anxious at least sometimes in the previous 2 weeks. To talk about this, we've got Devi Sundar, founder of Teletherapies, in the studio with me, and she recently posted a video on psychological distress during respiratory diseases. Devi, hello, good evening, and welcome to the program.
And good evening, Manny. Thanks for having me here today.
Now, brilliant. So, we're going to talk in particular about psychological distress during respiratory diseases. Tell me about the respiratory diseases. What sort of diseases are we talking about?
Yes, that's a good question. It's a broad spectrum of disease we are talking about here. So previously, it has been known as chronic bronchitis, emphysema, which is now termed as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and asthma, which prominently most people are aware of, and we'll talk about it in detail in a short while, and fibrosis, where it's named as interstitial lung disease, sarcoidosis, those sort of terms, which is all scientific terms. I know that's the wider community now receiving this on air while we're talking, so I'll be using less scientific terms and more of a common layman's term for understanding.
And I had TB actually in 1994, and a lot of Indian people do, Asian people do. And obviously, it's a very stressful thing because in India, when I was growing up, you always worried that people are going to die from TB because people did die. But of course, the medication in this country is much stronger. But I was worried not about dying, but I was worried about getting becoming seriously ill. But that's one of the anxieties you have, don't you, for those sort of things?
Yes, you're right. So when you're talking about early days of TB, there was not a defined understanding even among the clinicians, and there was a drug trials, vaccinations, whether we can create one, and many of the treatment regimens focused on medication. And also, it was well proven that pulmonary rehabilitation, which is pulmonary means lung, so lung rehabilitation helps people to recover. So it's like when your tissues in your lung gets damaged, it's not only cured by medicine. You're talking about here the fear of dying. Yeah, the fear of dying is actually a stressful action which is perceived by your brain. Okay, what is my worst outcome? Okay, am I going to die? Am I going to be the provider for my family? Am I going to be alive in the
In
society?
fact, that's what you're
Yeah.
more worried about your family than anybody else.
Exactly, and that sort of messages, communications in our brain creates that release of stress hormones, which is mainly I'm talking about when I'm pointing the brain is the hypothalamus in the frontal part of your brain, and that creates that has an axis to which connects our lung and our brain, and so there is a brain lung axis existing, like we also aware of the brain gut axis being existing, where we might feel our tummy is rumbling, okay, when we perceive some danger around us. It's because there is a quicker communication to our brain where our brain is perceiving, is there any danger? Am I safe always? Yes, yeah. Okay, so that's
but
the.
a lot of this is based on our experience, though, isn't it? So when your brain starts thinking, "Am I going to die?" because you've heard about other people dying from it, so your brain thinks,
Yeah,
maybe that's going to happen to you as well. So you worry about it sometimes for no reason.
definitely, you're right. And because our brain also stores past experiences, lessons learned from it, and what we observe around us is happening, will actually, to some extent, we have an illusion created whether that's going to happen to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what about people? I mean, a friend of mine has got asthma, and he often worries about certain weather conditions make it worse for him. He coughs more, and other times he's perfectly okay. And what about that anxiety?
So, particularly when you talk about asthma, we are talking about your airway tube. We are talking about a lung. Imagine a lung is an inverted shape of a tree. Okay,
Yes, yeah.
so the trunk of the tree is the windpipe, and the branches are the bronchi, and the leaves are the air sacs, which stores the gas, which is the oxygen we inhale. Most part of the gas contains oxygen. So we're talking about an asthma, particularly the bronchi are triggered with inflammatory response. It's also interesting to note it's not only the allergies outside externally is going to trigger the hyperresponsiveness or inflammation of the airways, which narrows down, and then that causes your breathlessness, but also the fear, the stress caused by the illusion about, am I going to be in danger? Am I going to be breathless? If my lung is going to come out of my body? So those sort of fears which you tell yourself to the communication of your own self to your brain is not helping you. So that is actually triggering more of
in fact,
release.
You start coughing even more.
Exactly. The hyperresponsiveness triggers more inflammatory response by the release of the hormones inside your body.
So what's the answer then? I mean, how should we manage it? How can we not have that fear in our heads?
The honest answer is we all are going to have this fear. So fear is one of the universal emotion which all humans have. So what we have to learn is how to overcome the fear. That's what we are going to learn. We are not going to be able to get rid of the fear, but how to manage the fear effectively so that we can have an improved quality of life.
So there's nothing wrong with having that fear as part of it, part of our human life, but we can have strategies to cope. What do you suggest? What should we do?
Yeah, so there are a lot of strategies in terms of, asides medication. Pulmonary rehabilitation is a good institutional program, I would call it as. It's a gold standard management for asthma and chronic obstructive disease and fibrosis. It has been proved in many lung conditions to be effective. And the concept of pulmonary rehabilitation is 100 years old. And still, it is less aware among the people.
Yes, yeah.
And when we talk about pulmonary rehabilitation, it stays alone in the scientific papers and researches, and it's not reaching to the public,
right,
to the maximum amount of public. Yes,
but most in this country, most people do get medication for most of these anxious sort of activities they could have. But what about our thinking? How can we change our thinking? So, we got the medication.
Yes.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But what about my psychological being? How can I change that, my attitude towards it?
That is very well put down. It's the attitude, okay? So it is about how you perceive. And that change of attitude comes more positive, and you get a positive outcome when you value the core. What are your values, core values? If you value health as a core value, you will actually invest yourself in behavior change. Okay,
Right.
so what we all have to be focusing in how we can change our behaviors. For example, the main cause for COPD, the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, is smoking, and asthma is an hyperresponsive. It is actually due to allergies and other things, the air pollution which we're talking about. And so, how we are going to change our behavior, the smoking or our protection against the air pollution, it comes along with the political change and the policymakers change and the public awareness. All is a multiple component that is going to be integrated. But as a human, how I can change is becoming conscious of your own core values. If you don't have a core value as your health, you can actually take steps towards developing health as your core value. So only if you value something, you're going to invest in getting more curious about it, learning about it.
Yes, definitely. So, what should we do? What's the first thing I need to do now after today if I've got one of those respiratory diseases? Tell me one thing I should do today.
So, if you have a respiratory disease, the one thing you can do is believe in yourself that you can survive this and reach out to the right healthcare professional to learn more about pulmonary rehabilitation. So, pulmonary rehabilitation is a multi component program where you're going to get education around your lung condition and exercise part about your lung breathing and everything. So breathing is one of the integral part which we so many of us take it for granted.
But last week I was talking about yoga, and we were saying that breathing, in fact yoga teaches you about breathing, and breathing can help with lots of things. In through your nose, out through your mouth.
Exactly. Yeah. And the interesting part is breathing can be controlled consciously and without a conscious efforts as well.
Right.
And so it's about focusing on how you breathe and good healthy ways. For example, healthy exercises and incorporating a 10 minutes of mindfulness in the morning when you wake up to trigger that responses of calmness inside your body, activating that systems. Our body is actually operated by the cables like autonomic nervous system. So triggering your parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to be very crucially important to have that relaxed, calm status and your lung to function in the right way.
Right, Devi Sundar, thank you very much for coming and explaining all of that. Let's hope we act upon it and have a better life. Thank you very much for coming in.
And thank you for this opportunity.